Thank you very much. I'm looking around this room, and I can't remember a time in Washington, D.C. where I've been in a room with more troublemakers. Peaceful troublemakers. I'm looking at this slide here, faithful action in a time of conflict. I'm reminded of, I remember receiving a Christmas card some years ago from then Senator Max Cleland, and on it he had a quote from Mother Teresa that said, we're not called upon to be successful, but we're called upon to be faithful. And, but I like a little success every once in a while too, I have a great admiration for the Friends Committee and for all the work that you do. You have an incredible Washington team. They make a real difference on Capitol Hill. We wouldn't have come so close in that vote to end the war in Afghanistan if it wasn't for the work that is done here in Washington and then the work that you do out in the grassroots. Every once in a while, you can convince one of these stubborn members of Congress that they should do the right thing. And the one thing and I think Walter Jones, who is a great partner and a really courageous man, I think one of the things he would agree with me on is that Lyndon Johnson was right about one thing, and that is it's easy to get into war. It's hard as hell to get out of one. And in Washington, it is frustrating whether you're on the inside or the outside, because all the discussion is about winning or saving face or credibility or looking good or showing that we're strong and never giving in. And when you think about it, none of those things really are the issues we should be talking about. The issue should be, is what we're doing right or wrong? Is there sense to our policy, or is there no sense to our policy? And I will tell you, both with regard to Iraq and Afghanistan, there is no sense to our policy anymore. There's none. And I've been to Afghanistan on 2 occasions. I've been to Walter Reed Hospital on countless occasions. I've been to more funerals than I care to even recall. I've talked to more families who are, who have lost their husbands or wives or sons or daughters or mothers or fathers who have asked why. Why did my loved one have to die? And I have nothing. I have nothing to say to them and answer that question, because there is really no good reason why American men and women should be dying for a corrupt regime in Afghanistan. A regime that does not respect human rights. A regime that routinely degrades the U.S. effort there on top of everything else. I was there, and a soldier from Massachusetts said to me, I just saw one of my buddies get blown up yesterday. And he says, and I listened to the radio this morning, and I heard President Karzai basically talk about how rotten the American servicemen and women are. He said, what the hell are we doing here, Congressman? And I got to tell you, if the goal of Afghanistan was to get rid of Al-Qaeda, we won. It's done. They left a long time ago. They don't want to. There's no reason to believe they'll even come back. But now we're into this very complicated and confusing policy of nation building. And now we're going to rid the country of the Taliban. Well, I hate to tell everybody, but the Taliban are indigenous to Afghanistan. They were born there. They live there. They may not be nice people, but that's where they're from. And as we're seeing, is the mightiest military power on the planet, that it's tough to get people to leave their homes. And that, in fact, what we're finding is that the longer we're there, the more the Taliban are gaining in strength and in numbers. I mean, they're not going away. We're not diminishing them. They're gaining recruits every single day. So what the hell are we doing? Now we have this super committee, which I think is the stupidest idea that has ever come to pass in terms of trying to fix our economic problems, but a super committee that's saying we got to find $1.3 trillion in savings over the next 10 years. You know, otherwise there'll be automatic cuts that will go into effect across the board. And so where does the discussion begin? Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, SNAP, food stamps, nutrition programs, Pell Grants, we're told are all on the table. Well, I've sent a letter to everybody in the super committee to remind them, in case they didn't know, that we're not paying for these wars, that we borrow for these wars. We borrow in Afghanistan $10 billion a month. We don't pay for it. And my view is that we have one or two things we can do. Either end the war, which I think is preferable, or have the guts to get up and say to the American people, we want you to pay for it. You know, but this notion that you can fight wars on the credit card and then, you know, and then the war becomes an issue that goes on the back burner, I think is immoral. You know, I think, you know, and these, you know, and what, you know, the men and women in uniform shouldn't be the only one to sacrifice in their families. You know, if you're going to take this nation to war, you know, we all need to be in this, or we all not, or we shouldn't go. It's that simple. You know, there was an article in the New York Times, I don't know how many of you read this, in the op-ed page, this guy Charles Blow usually does these graphs, and he showed how we went from surpluses to deficits. And the biggest driver of our deficit are these war costs, not paid for. Why doesn't somebody say, okay, let's fix that, you know, let's go after that, rather than going after programs that help people, and mostly vulnerable people in this country. You know, I hope that, and this is why I love the Friends Committee, and I want to pay special homage to Ed Snyder for being such a great example to all of us. A guy that doesn't ever give up, and keeps on going. And this is tough work. It's tough work to fight for peace. It's tough work to fight for justice, because it doesn't happen easily. I don't know how many remember I.F. Stone. Remember? Yeah, well, I remember I was at a speech he gave, and, you know, and he said, you know, talking about how tough, this was when Reagan was president, how tough everything is. And he says, but, you know, it's the responsibility of every citizen, you know, to be involved and to take a stand. And I'm paraphrasing him, but I remember this because I never heard anyone else say this quite this way. He said, if you piss on a stone long enough, you'll make an indentation. And he said, and he went on to say, he says, in his lifetime, you know, he said, you know, he never thought he'd see the day when J. Edgar Hoover would be exposed for the jerk that he really was, or that that we would expose some of the excesses of our CIA and some of the assassination plots. And he went on and on about some of the things, of the victories. And we have to remind ourselves that there are victories here. I mean, we are making a difference, not as fast as we want, but we are making a difference here. And I will tell you, this war in Iraq would still be going on if it weren't for people like those of you who are here in this room. And this war in Afghanistan will go on forever unless people like those of you in this room continue to insist that it comes to an end. I mean, and the reason why Europe is especially important right now is because you can't, you know, our news in this country has become so dumbed down that if you turn on the Today Show or you turn on the nightly news, it's more about entertainment. I know more about Michael Jackson's doctor than I ever want to know about, you know? But when that is the headline in the news and, you know, Americans being killed in Afghanistan or children or civilians being killed in Afghanistan is an afterthought, there's something wrong with the way we're doing things in this country. And so you have to be and continue to be, you know, the agitators or the troublemakers to get people to start talking about some of these uncomfortable things. This presidential election going on right now, the war in Afghanistan ought to be front and central. And President Obama ought to be able to tell us, you know, when he's bringing these troops home And I mean bringing them home, not like in Iraq, where I'm now reading that we're going to take our troops and redeploy them in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia or everywhere else. But, Mitt Romney or Rick Perry or, God help us, Michelle Bachmann or whatever, they ought to tell us what their plan is to end these wars. And I'll just finish with this, and I'll happy to take questions. National security is a term that gets bandied around here an awful lot. But national security, to the people I represent, means things like jobs and education and health care, and a clean environment. Mrs. O'Leary in Worcester, Massachusetts isn't losing sleep at night wondering whether Osama bin Laden's brother is going to come storming through her door. But she is losing sleep wondering whether she got enough money to pay her heating bill this winter, or whether or not she'd be able to pay her rent or pay her medications. I mean, those are the things that people worry about every day. That's our security. That's what we should be talking about. So when you hear senators and congressmen say, it's all about our national security, well, at some point, national security has to mean us here at home. It has to mean dealing with poverty here at home. It has to mean ending hunger here at home. I co-chair the House Hunger Caucus. There are 50 million Americans who are hungry. 22 million of them are children. We should be ashamed. We should be ashamed. Richest country in the world, everybody should have access to food in this country. We ought to fix that. And so I will just say, and again, if Walter were here, Walter, you got to get him back here, because Walter is one of the most deeply religious and kind and wonderful human beings I have ever met in Congress. I mean, he's motivated by what's right inside of him and by conscience, and there aren't a lot of people that are like that anymore. And so, if he were here, I mean, he would want me to say to everybody, all of you here, we are so grateful for you. You have no idea. I mean, going to work every day with this crew, you're better than prescription drugs, believe me. And I want to make sure that you know how much we appreciate what you're doing. And we need people to stand up and to push back and to fight back and to get our country out of wars and to demand that we fight for justice here at home. And so with that, and again, I'm honored to get the Edward F Snyder Award because it represents all that's great about all of you. I say thank you so much for this honor.